Welcome to the show. It is Daniel Wortman coming to you live from the Dream Imaginate Sports Studios. It is 9 a.m. on the East Coast. This is your 6 a.m. West Coast wake-up call and all time zones in between and around the world. Thanks for tuning in this Wednesday, July the 3rd. Well, we were all talking about it. Would the U.S. be able to overcome, prevail, get through England? And they were able to do so. And as we talked about yesterday, scoring first and scoring early, I felt like would be the key. And indeed, it was. Getting that early goal, England was able to level, but you could tell that unsettled England. England were playing in the first part of that match in a way where they were trying to hold on for dear life. The U.S. were just coming at them. And I felt like if England were able to weather the storm in the same way that I thought if France could have weathered the storm and the game then kind of settles down, that England would have a very good chance. And U.S. scores early. England comes back 10 minutes later, scores again. Alex Morgan scores on her birthday later in the first half. They go into halftime, 2-1. Second half, most of the chances were with England. And, excuse me, most of the chances were with England. England scores to tie the game about midway through the second half, ruled offside by a toenail. I mean, it was that tight. It was really, really close. And later, with about 10 minutes to go in the match, England secures a penalty, and captain steps up to take it and may have taken her worst penalty of her life. Just a horrible attempt. A listener guessed right, and the captain kicked it right to her. Nair still almost. I mean, it almost found its way underneath her, but she was able to keep it out. And that really was the last really good chance for England to level the game. If the offside call and that penalty go a different direction, obviously we're talking about England prevailing. England's going to come out of that match feeling like they could have won. It wouldn't surprise me if they felt like they should have won. But there is something that you have to understand about this U.S. women's national team. Number one, every team that they face in a tournament like this, the U.S. is always 100% of the time going to throw the kitchen sink at you in the first 15 minutes of the match. They are going to be heavy metal soccer at you for 15 minutes. They are going to sprint, attack, come at you. That is what those at the top want to do. That they want to come in and create pressure and bully the opponent into submission in the first 15 minutes. And they feel like if they're successful in that formula and they get a goal, then they can dictate the rest of the match and they can keep the pressure on the opponent for the rest of the match without having to attack as much. And that mentality, that philosophy that these players have, the mental fortitude to be able to execute that game in, game out, knowing that the opponents know their game plan, and yet still be able to pull that off consistently is remarkable. And their ability to do that over and over and over again has proved to be a real key to their success. Get up early, make you chase, even if you come back and tie. We create the pressure first. in the scheme of soccer, in American soccer, there's a word that's not talked about very much in this regard. It is part of the global conversation about the game, and that is being a protagonist. Are we the ones who take action? Or are we the reactive ones? Are we always reacting, or are we the aggressor? And the aggressor does not necessarily mean that it has to look like the way the U.S. women's national team play in terms of style, etc. But what it does mean is that when you are the protagonist, when you are the one who is going to be on the front foot in the way that you play, it is you that is dictating, you that are determining how your opponent plays, rather than allowing your opponent to determine how you want to play. And that's the real story of being a protagonist in a team setting. And in this setting, the U.S. came out and said, this is how we're going to play, and we're going to force you to adopt to us. In England, were unable to get a hold of the game early. They were trying to weather the storm. A defensive error in the back, a header by Kristen Press, who, by the way, was fantastic yesterday. And I said this on Twitter, and I stand by this statement. Rapinoe has been having really great moments, and you want great moments from your top players, from your big names. You want great moments from them. But outside of those great moments, I felt like Rapinoe had been struggling. She had been a step slow. Some of her performances down the wing, with and without the ball, were not really causing a lot of issues for the other teams. I thought some of those performances were dreadful, or poor. And when you saw Kristen Press come in, energy, she was creating a lot of problems for England down their right side of their defense, the left side attack for the U.S. She was on the end of the first goal. She got the header, being there on the back post. When you saw that change, it was tremendous. And one of the other things we talked about yesterday too was Lindsey Horan. Playing Lindsey Horan from the top, I felt like was going to be a key. Jill Ellis did do that. I would love to think that she's listening and watching this show, but that's probably not the case. But nonetheless, I'm glad that she put Lindsey Horan in from the start, and having Kristen Press and Lindsey Horan in, I felt like was a big difference. So kudos to Jill Ellis and her staff for making those changes, and running those two players out in the starting 11. And I think it really helped the U.S., especially in the beginning of the match, to just put pressure, keep pressure. And even though England were able to equalize, it took them a while to kind of get things kind of leveled out. I don't think England ever fully played the game that they wanted to play. And that is a credit to the U.S. women's national team. They had moments, but I think England fell victim to trying to beat the U.S. using the U.S.'s tactics. So there was a lot of get the ball out, try to do a big switch, not necessarily attacking through the middle, which was a lot of pregame chatter, was that England were going to try to come up and attack through the middle. That wasn't consistent. There was a lot of impatience trying to get back down the wing, which is very much that American style. And there's not a team in the world that can execute the U.S. women's national team style as well as the U.S. women's national team. So you're really kind of playing into their hands. Even though England had more possession than the U.S., it wasn't an overwhelming number. And that was, to me, where England were unsuccessful in being the protagonist for much of the match in the way that I'm sure they were hoping they would be. If England were going to have a real good chance to win, I felt like they needed to be in that 60 to 65% possession range for the game, and they were down in the 50s for the match. And that was symbolic of the fact that England were also wasteful with their possession, very impatient at times. And, matter of inches from tying the game, et cetera, and I get it. But I felt like England could have done a little bit better in their execution, and maybe we see a different result. But nonetheless, it worked out the way we were hoping. If you're an American, and we are on to the finals today, the second semifinal, Netherlands, Sweden. I think the Netherlands win this match and face the U.S. in the final, but we will see. I don't know. Other news I wanted to get to quickly, and that is it came out today that the Premier League are a step closer to the Women's Super League takeover from the English Football Association. Clubs unanimously agreed to conduct a feasibility study into the idea at a shareholders meeting last month. The FA is understood to be open to the idea and see the women's England teams and grassroots participation as their long-term priorities. Any takeover could be several seasons away, and the FA, which set up the WSL in 2011, and has overseen its development to become Europe's only full-time professional competition with 12 teams for 2019 and 20. Premier League affiliated clubs make up 13 of the 22 sides in the women's top two divisions, and some believe the WSL could be run more professionally. The league has recently been boosted by the promotion of Manchester United and Tottenham Hotspur to the top division and a £10 million sponsorship deal with Barclays. Couple points there. Here we see England investing, putting resources into the women's game. We've had several guests on, including Jack Gidney, talk about the money coming into the women's side of the game in England and the difference that is already beginning to make. We have seen that with England making a deep run in this tournament, and I think that's only going to progress and get bigger and better for the England women's national team and program. Last year, the FA revealed they are to increase their investment in women's and girls football by a further £50 million over 6 years. They are halfway through their 4-year game plan for growth strategy, aiming to boost participation and create a high-performance system for England teams. So England is putting money, they're putting resources into the women's side of the game, and they've already got two divisions, promotion, relegation in place. That's part of the culture. It's part of the way you do what you do. The NWSL here in the U.S. is struggling, 9 teams having lost the Boston Breakers. We need to open this thing up, allow any ownership group to put in a team into the top division and have a second division, a third division, and figure out an open pyramid and allow the game to grow organically. Let the market begin to shape what we see around the country on the women's side as well as the men's side. And we're seeing this on the women's side in England. Money is pouring in, the money that we are not getting here in the U.S., even though we have the preeminent gold standard women's national team in the world. We don't have a league that is equal to that, and we've got to get there in a hurry, or the success we are seeing means that the best way forward for our players to continue that success is going to be to go to Europe and play. And even though that is a necessity for the men, we could catch up before it's too late on the women's side and make this be the destination league to play in. And I think we should do that. I think we should make that a focus. So before we get to our guests coming up after the break, I just want to let you know that this interview we were able to tape a couple nights ago due to scheduling and vacation and 4th of July plans. And Thomas Sowinski Jr., Tom, and I met several years ago when Eric Winalda was running for president of U.S. Soccer. And it's going to be a fun chat looking at some different ways that we can improve soccer in this country. And you'll also hear his hopes for the game last night, which have turned out that we were able to move through 2-1. I think he predicts 3-1. So we shall see in the interview coming up just a minute after the break. Our sponsor this half hour is Ductig Brand, DUKTIG brand.com. Get your journals, get your planners, see their products. Use promo code DWSHOW to get 10% off your order. DWSHOW to get 10% off your order. Do it today. You will not regret it. We will be right back in just a few moments with an interview we did the other night with Tom Sowinski. Thanks for tuning in this July the 3rd, and we are celebrating that victory yesterday. And look forward to a final on Sunday for this U.S. women's national team. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to the show. Thanks for tuning in this Wednesday morning, July the 3rd. We are pleased to be joined by Thomas Sowinski Jr., otherwise known as Tom. Tom, welcome to the show. How are you this morning?
I am doing well, Daniel. How are you?
I am doing great. You and I met back in 2017 whenever I was working with Eric Winaldo on his campaign for president of U.S. Soccer, and at the time, you were president of the New Hampshire Soccer Association, and we hit it off. Both of us dads of two boys, two soccer-playing, soccer-loving boys, soccer families, had a lot in common, and since then, you made the move out west. What are you doing nowadays in soccer, serving the game here in America?
Well, right now I'm representing the West region for U.S. Youth Soccer as their representative to the board of directors.
So in that role, what is your primary responsibility or responsibilities as a representative to the board of U.S. Youth Soccer for the West?
So we've got 14 states here in the far west region, and it's my job to understand what their needs, their concerns are, to bring and represent to the board. My focus is more on the policy and governance side, and I've got a counterpart, a general manager, Marley Wilson, who is more focused on the operational side. So together, Marley and I work very well. He's a paid employee of U.S. Youth, and I'm a volunteer. And we both, work to support our constituency from the operational side in Marley's case, and a policy and governance side from my standpoint.
For the audience, could you give us just a hypothetical example of an issue that you might be looking to resolve on behalf of one of your constituent states in the West region?
Sure. One of the things that is a big topic, and it's a big topic around the country. It's certainly in the space of protecting children, and how are we implementing all these child safe rules? The president passed a law, going on 18 months now, that all sports organizations must have a way of validating that the adults that are taking part in growing their kids don't have any issues in their background, and that those adults are safe. And there's a lot of questions around, how are we implementing it from a U.S. youth soccer perspective, from a U.S. soccer perspective. If you can imagine, we're in 50 different states where each state has differences in laws and differences in rules and how we do background checks on the adults that are serving our children. And, we need to understand those and work as a national body to support all of them. And there's, unique differences between each. And so I've fielded a lot of questions around, what are we doing from a national body perspective, and also what are we doing from the federation perspective.
So, in your role as the West representative, you also serve on the U.S. Youth Soccer Board of Directors. The U.S. Youth Soccer organization is the largest member in terms of player registrations in the entire country, if I'm correct.
We are, yeah. We've got not just in terms of the U.S. Soccer Federation, but I think we are the largest youth organization in the country. We've got a little over 3 million youth members and about 900,000 adult volunteers that are in our organization.
So this is a big deal. This is not a small potatoes setup there. You've got a lot of kids, a lot of adults moving in a lot of different directions depending on what part of the country they're from, what their local soccer scene is like, etc. When you are in a board meeting or you're talking to constituents in the states, having your background as a state association president in New Hampshire, what are you looking to do in terms of helping grow the sport for this country and continue to try to find ways to build the sport throughout the U.S.?
Well, first and foremost, being a youth organization, it's making sure that we keep the kids in mind through all the decisions. They're our constituency as the ultimate end customer. So it's providing them with the various different types of programming to develop as young players. We've got kids of all different abilities. Some from your top players down to your recreational players. We've got players, with various disabilities. We've got a great program in Top Soccer that allows them to play the game that they love, but in a manner that they can do it. And so it's making sure that all of our kids have an opportunity to fall in love with the game and really become players for life.
So a player, you mentioned several different players, different backgrounds, some maybe with some physical challenges, etc. Can you define what a player pathway would be for some of those players, and how you envision growing those player pathways to give more access and opportunity to some of these kids?
Yeah, the player pathway has been something that's been talked a lot about, both regionally and nationally. It's difficult for a parent today, one that may not know anything about soccer and have a young player that absolutely loves the game, to know where is the right place to put them. Who do I even go to? And most of the times what they start off with is their local town organization. They'll go and They'll play in their rec department. They'll play in the local youth organizations, and that's typically where most players will get their start. But then once you get in there and you start playing, where do you go? You've got a lot of competition from local clubs, area clubs. You've got your Olympic development programs that we have through U.S. Youth that you can play into, and then you've got regional and national tournaments to go to. But then as you continue to get older, how does that feed into high school? How does that feed into college? If I want to get onto an MLS team, if I want to be seen by our national team coaches, where do I go? If I'm a very good player, I'm going to use Wyoming, for example. If you're in Wyoming, how do you get seen by a national team scout? If you're a really, really good player coming out of Wyoming, how do you get identified? And we need to find those opportunities so that, we can identify players so that they can continue their pathway, but then encourage them to also, all pathways don't lead to the national team. Many players, and I'd say the vast majority of players, they're going to, go on, play high school. Some will play college. Some may make it into the MLS or NWSL or maybe even into UPSL leagues. But we also have players that eventually they're going to become your next coaches. And how do we encourage these players to become good coaches and give back to the game and help the next crop of players to grow? And then some of these players are going to become referees. And how do we encourage players to become referees? Referees and referee shortage is a big challenge right now. And really it's, coaches and parents that are just abusive to young referees. They say it's not worth it. I'm not going to do it. And so how do we make that environment better and encourage players that, hey, you know the game very well. Maybe you should go into refereeing, because if we're going to grow this game, we want to add players, but we also have to add coaches and referees as well. So it's helping that parent who may not understand the system, and being a parent in the system, I can say it's often confusing. What's the right pathway for my boys? And ultimately, we need to build a pathway for each individual player that they know, if I'm going to be playing in college, here's where I want to go, and here's where I aspire to be, and if I'm going to be going into and trying to get on the national team because I believe I'm that good, here's where I need to be seen. And so each player is going to have their individual pathway. Every player is going to peak at a different age. Some players peak later than others. Some players peak earlier. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we want to find a way that we have kids that fall in love with this game for life. And regardless of where they end up, when they're older, like you and I are, they're giving back to the game just like we do.
So speak for yourself. When we're older, I'm choosing to ignore that last comment you made.
We're not kids anymore.
Oh man, I choose to still picture myself in my 20s. That's just in my head. That's just kind of where I blocked at. So I'm just going to ignore that last comment you made. When we look at some of those player pathways and opportunities, there's kind of two kind of system or setups that are often mentioned in relation to our system, and that is the inner cities. And it's also the rural areas where there's not a big, massive population density, and creates its own set of challenges in terms of travel, access, etc. How can we grow our inner city programming, and then also the follow up to that would be, how can we grow our rural programming to make the game more accessible in those communities as well?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because both are areas where we would call they're underserved, and while both are underserved areas, they both come with their own logistical and unique challenges. Certainly with inner city youth, a lot of times they're poor. How do we get them into the game? There's a lot of great groups out there that are looking to try and grow futsal courts and build and give more to the community, so that these these athletes have the ability to play and grow at the game. But at the end of the day, there's certainly a cost barrier to some of the inner cities. And how do we help out and defray that cost? Unfortunately, there's certain fixed costs with whether it's leagues, equipment, tournaments, et cetera. There's costs that are associated. And as much as, I'm not a big fan of the pay to play, especially when the parents are the ones that have to pay, we do have to find a way of, paying for those costs, because the costs are there. And we need to be better at providing opportunities to lower that cost or eliminate that cost for these players. If we're going to find, some of the next top talents, they're going to come out of some of the inner cities. And we need to encourage them to get into the game, to come play it where it's safe, in an environment that they're allowed to thrive, grow. We just talked about pathways, and allow them to be seen, so that they can one day play professionally in what they're doing. But even if they don't play professionally, just be able to be in the game, and maybe one day they become the next coaches that give back to their communities and grow for the next generation of inner city youth. And being at the regional championships last weekend in Idaho, there were some teams that were coming up that were funded by, whether it was Las Vegas or LA. They've got teams and clubs there. Las Vegas Sporting Club, they do a very good job at supporting and providing opportunities for some of the inner city kids to come and play, and they played some great ball. Likewise, if you look, while we've got a lot of inner cities in my region, we've also got some states that are have some other logistical challenges, which are very rural. Wyoming, Montana, Alaska, New Mexico. Some of these states are very large from a landmass size, but their populations aren't as big, and so you can't fix the population quickly, right? That's something that's kind of outside of our scope. But being able to promote soccer in a way so that the travel is not always a prohibitive factor. Being able to maybe host jamborees, so you're not traveling every single weekend, but maybe you're traveling every other weekend, and everyone's coming together into one central location so that you can get a game or two in over the course of the weekend, and not have to do it all the time, because the travel in those states, it can take you 2 hours to drive one way to play an hour-and-a-half game. That doesn't make sense, especially when we're talking about young kids. Spending more time in the car than playing the game you love, it's not always helpful. So it's finding ways. Maybe we play smaller sided games, and instead of trying to find 11v11 teams, we're playing 9v9 or even 7v7, and finding ways to still play the sport, still be competitive, still develop players, but you can do it outside the traditional norms, because to me, having the kids play is better than not having them do it. So it's looking outside the box in ways that we can provide those opportunities.
When we look at para athletes in our Paralympic programming, there's a recent official name change of the U.S. Olympic Committee to the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee, which I thought was a nice positive step in terms of the official organization and kind of recognizing all that they do. And when we look at our programming for players, whether that be deaf soccer or other soccer programming for players with disabilities, etc. What can we do as a country to grow those programs, make them more accessible, and find ways for more and more communities to get involved in that aspect of the game?
I think it's a great question, because I can honestly say myself that even going back a few years ago, I did not realize that we had these types of programs. As a kid growing up, I didn't know that you would have those pathways, and recognizing that there were opportunities like Top Soccer. I didn't know about that for a long time, largely because I didn't know someone who had a disability and would play in a program like that. So one of the things that we need to do is be better at raising the awareness in the first place. We have these programs. Soccer is a game for all. And, I made a tweet last week about it. I love watching power soccer. You see what these athletes can do. I mean, they're in wheelchairs, and you watch what they can do on a court with a ball. It's absolutely amazing. And being able to put those opportunities out there and get them in front and raise awareness is critical. I think one of the ways we can do it is, raising that awareness when you're watching a game like the Women's World Cup. You've got the Gold Cup and the Women's World Cup going on right now. Let's put some advertising out there while you've got people's attention and raise the awareness about these programs, because they are critical. And you've got your Paralympic team, you've got your deaf national team, both of which are supported through the federation, through the Olympic Committee, and being able to let parents know who may have a child with a disability that, hey, there's places for your kid to play is important. And how do we get that out? It's around raising the awareness. It's about getting the message out that there are these programs. And we talked a little bit about pathways. How would a parent know if they've got a child who's deaf but loves the sport? How would they know where to get this, give this player the development that they need? Because I had a great opportunity last summer to host the men's deaf national team in Foxborough, and we went over and I had a chance to watch them play a game, and it's very interesting how they communicate, and they use such verbal or visual cues, and how the referees need to play with a flag, and when there's a whistle, they put a visual cue up so that the players know that there's been a whistle or a stoppage in play. It was amazing to watch. It's totally different. And had I not been there, I would not have known this. And so now that it's an awareness for me, I think, it's partly my job to help raise the awareness for others to know that they're here. But it's also, I think, as an organization in a country, we need to better highlight that those programs exist.
You mentioned pay-to-play soccer a few minutes ago, and there's been some articles written over the last few years about the cost for families to participate in travel soccer, and not only the cost, but also the amount of time. And you referenced a little bit of that as well in terms of travel time, getting to and from matches, etc. What can we do to grow the game and make it more accessible to more communities, and at the same time lower the barrier of entry, as well as trying to reduce some of the burden of travel on these families?
It's interesting because as a country and as parents, we always want the best for our children, and we want to put our children in the best places to grow and to develop. And it really could be anything, whether it's soccer or anything else. And Eric and I were talking about this during his campaign. He asked, what is it that, why do we do it for our kids? And I told him, my kids happen to love soccer. My kids love piano. I'd be supporting them and, becoming the best pianist out there. But a lot of parents, we all want the best for our children, and we try to find the best opportunities, and we're willing to pay any money to do it. But not every parent comes from the same means. And as much as you would love to pay so your kid can go play in a top club, it's not always feasible. And so how do we reduce that? And, I've talked a lot with various different clubs and coaches, and the reality is that there's costs, and somebody has to pay for those costs, but it doesn't have to always be the parent. And I think, the fact that, MLS is looking at solidarity payments for some of the players that have left to go play in Europe, I think that's a good first step. And here's the reason why I say that. I have a very good friend, Tosh Farrell. He used to be the director of Everton's youth academy. My oldest son, Tommy, played for him when he had his own development academy here in the United States. And Tosh and I have stayed friends through the years. And last summer, my boys went over to go play play with him in a camp. And I took Tosh and his wife out for dinner one night with my family, and Tosh and I were talking. And he was telling me that the club he's also working with, the Kendalltown Wanderers, they're a 6th or 7th division club. But their goal is not to try and make their way up into the next division or even to try and ever get into the first division. Their goal is to develop players. And how they do it is they bring players in, they have them play, and as they develop players and they showcase the players, those players are then sold to higher teams. So as that player develops and needs to move beyond that club, Kendalltown makes money off of that because it's the investment that they've made in the player to develop that player. Well, they use that money to reinvest in growing and developing other players. And so the costs are borne by the club. They're not borne by the player themselves. And I think if we can find a way in the United States to get to a model where you're not always trying to fight over the same players, that you can grow and develop in your local club, and if you go and you move up into a merit-based ladder of play, you can find ways of, as those solidarity payments, and for those that don't know what a solidarity payment is, it's when a player, in other leagues throughout the world gets purchased by a larger club, the clubs that help develop that player get a portion of the fee. And even if you were a smaller club, you still get a portion for helping to develop that player. So that model of solidarity payments allows for the costs to be the costs borne by the club to develop the player to be covered, but it's not covered by the parent. And so, yes, there are costs to develop players, but we need to find a way that we can reduce the cost on the parent so the player, regardless of their parents' means, can really develop and grow, because all parents want the best for their kids, but not all have the means. And this sport shouldn't be about, or really any sport, it shouldn't be about whose parents have the most money. It should be really a merit-based system based off of how I play as a player, and let's let the best players compete and move up to the top levels.
Speaking of meritocracy and competing and excellence, how can we as a country get better at the game of soccer as a whole? How can we reach for excellence and grow and take those next steps of growth in this country in terms of competition, merit, excellence, etc.?
Well, I mean, it's certainly, in terms of growing the game, it's getting more players in, at the grassroots level. But, when you talk about meritocracy and development of players, it's creating that environment where the best move on. That's what competition is built on. That's what, America has been built on. It's been, the competition within America. I mean, it's driven innovation. It's driven advancements in technology. It's driven advancements in medicine and the medical field. So competition is always going to be the way to make ourselves better. And so we need to find ways of growing the game and allowing the best to continue to grow and develop. And one of the things that I believe we do have to get to, and certainly our women's team is having a phenomenal World Cup right now. Our men are doing well in the Gold Cup, but you look at other countries and they're really investing in their programs. And we've had a very tight game against France, 2-1 the other night. And we're pre-taping this before the women's game against England. But you take a look at the amount of effort England has put into their game. I think our women are going to have their hands full against the Lionesses tomorrow night. So how do we continue to grow this game? We need to create some of the best leagues in the world. Everybody wants to go to Europe to play. And really, I'd say the Premier League is probably the top place most people want to end up and play. You take a look at Christian Pulisic. He just left Dortmund and he's now going to be at Chelsea. And why is it that our young players, our Timothy Weahs, our Christian Pulisic, are going to Europe to play and develop when European players, Tim Rooney, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, they're coming over to the MLS at the twilight of their career to play a few more years before they officially retire? I want the MLS, I want the NWSL to be some of the top leagues in the world. And we'll know we're there when the young players, the young top players in the world are coming to the MLS or the NWSL to play, and not our young players going elsewhere. So we need to find a way of making those leagues really, really strong so that A, we retain and develop our own talent, and B, we're attracting some of the top talent across the world. Because if our players really want to compete on the world stage, especially our men who have struggled of late, we need to find a way of developing them at that level. And the MLS is not there yet. I mean, it's a great league. I love following it. Although I will say the New England Revolution have been disappointing me as of late these last few years. But I still love them even out here in California. But how do we make that league and the NWSL as strong as they can be? Because ultimately that's where you're trying to get to. It's where you're trying to compete to get to. And if we have a pathway that allows you to continue to move up and get to that place, we're going to build the competition that I know America can build. We've done it before. You look at the rest of some of our major sports and their athletes, we can do it. We've got the people to do it. We've got the population. We've got the money and the investment. We can do it. So I have faith that we're going to get there.
In terms of building our leagues into the best leagues in the world and raising that quality and excellence, how can we provide more opportunities, especially on the women's side? The NWSL lost the Boston Breakers down to 9 teams. You see these investments being made over in England, for example. They're putting a lot of money into their women's league, which is providing a lot of incentives for the clubs and the players, and now that those players are getting to live and work as professional players, and that is their job. They're not having to kind of play part-time and then still be a soccer player. That is their profession. How can we see the NWSL and the women's league grow and match what is, to me, the gold standard of women's national teams in the world, and that's our U.S. women's national team program. It has been at the top for a long time. And a lot of countries have been trying to figure out ways to quite frankly topple our women's national team and catch up. And they've been the standard. They have been the standard of excellence and have been trying to lead by example. To me, I think they are probably and I said this on the show yesterday, they're probably the greatest example of a front runner team in soccer in the world right now. It is just amazing to see everyone's gunning for them. They know it, and they just keep coming, and they keep pushing themselves for excellence. And so how do we get that into our women's professional league, the NWSL? How do we build excellence in there and competition and grow into more markets so that we can make this even more accessible to our girls growing up right now who want to be the next Alex Morgan or be the next Crystal Dunn or Mal Pugh, etc.
I love watching our women play. I mean, they are so exciting. They're having a very wonderful World Cup this time around. Certainly, I would say, definitely if they weren't the favorites to win it coming in, they're definitely the favorites now. I don't know who wouldn't have had them the favorites, maybe France, but the French probably thought France was going to beat them. But, and I say this a lot when in business, and I talk with companies I've worked with. You don't innovate and change what you do on your way down. You innovate when you're at your top, and our women are at the top of their game. There's no question about it. But you're absolutely right. Every single country is gunning for them. And having a 9-team professional league in the United States for the women is just not going. It's not enough. We need to grow and expand that league and provide more opportunities for our young girls and our women to continue to develop and grow and be ready to compete on the top stage. We were talking just a minute ago about how competition creates some of the best players, and we need to continue that competition in the U.S. for the women, where our top female athletes, they're able to focus on being the best football or soccer player in the world, not having to worry about, I need to go work after training, or after my morning workouts, I have to go to my other job because I've got bills to pay. They need to be able to focus on, being able to develop as players. You take a look at what England's doing. And I think all of their Premier League clubs have women's teams now. And those Premier League clubs, whether it's the Chelsea women, the Liverpool women, they are supported by their men's teams. And we've got a couple of clubs like that here in the U.S. where the men and women, they're owned by the same people. But if we really want to grow this game, maybe we need to take a look at what other countries are doing. And I'm not saying to copy them, but to understand what they're doing, how they're spending their money, how they're making the investments, so that as a nation, we can find out what works for us and continue to make that investment in the women's game, so that, people are going to keep gunning for them, but they're still staying on top. And we can only do that by reinventing how we develop our women, so that our women stay at the top of their game.
So in looking at access and opportunity on a macro level, if you're a young kid, say you're a kid named Miguel and you're growing up in West Texas or New Mexico, or you're a kid growing up on the inner cities of Baltimore, Maryland. How can we as a country create more opportunities and cheaper barriers for those kids to get scouted and get seen in order to get better opportunities in terms of pathways to national teams, colleges, etc.?
Well, I think, for any kid, regardless of, their background, their parents' economic ability, their demographics, etc., we need to find ways of getting, whether it's an inner city kid, if it's a rural kid, we need to find ways of getting them identified. And right now, the biggest way to get identified is to make it into a development academy team, the U.S. Soccer's DA. And, you go to the showcases, and that's where the national team scouts are. A lot of college coaches go there because it's a great place to showcase some of the top talent. But I think there's 36 states that don't have a development academy, I think is the latest statistic. I could be off by a state or two, but I think it's 36 don't have a DA. How's a kid in Montana going to get noticed? I mean, if that's really where you're going to get noticed, how do you get noticed? I would love to see, something like the, ODP compete with some of the DAs. So if you're a player and you've earned your spot to get into some of these DA showcases, why can't a state Olympic development program go and compete in some of these showcases? If we really are about finding and developing the best, why is the net cast so small? And I'm not certainly questioning why, but we need to find a way of getting more access, not limiting access, and getting those opportunities for players to get in front of those that are making the decisions on who should go to the next level or who should be invited to a training camp, et cetera. We got to really get our best in front of it. So building that pathway, and I think ODP is a great way to do it because it's in all 55 state associations. And if you can get your best players in the state that aren't playing in a development academy program, get them into ODP. How do we reduce the barriers to get players into that program? Those are some of the things that is on my agenda to work on. But how do we get more players in ODP, make those ODP teams stronger, and get those ODP teams in front of some of the same scouts that are looking at DA players? Because I'm willing to bet there's a lot of players that aren't in the DA that are very deserving to be at maybe some of our whether it's our youth national training camps or some of our, senior training camps. I bet there's some players that are being overlooked.
So I want to close with one final question. It's a question I've been asking a lot of our guests, and I think you have a real unique insight into American soccer, U.S. soccer, U.S. youth soccer, your time as a president of a state association, now serving on the board of U.S. youth soccer. If you were in charge of American soccer at large for a day, and you could do anything with your day in charge, what would you do with that 24 hours and that ability to grow, improve, change, alter, etc., American soccer and make it better?
Well, you're giving me the magic wand.
I did.
I would. Man, that's a tough question to answer. I don't think it's something that it's going to take a magic wand to do. But if there was a way that I could lower the cost for players, get more players involved, because to me it starts at the youth level. It starts at the grassroots. It starts at recreation. So getting players involved to love the game. And if I could do that and get more players in, I mean, you're only giving me one day, so it's very difficult. But if I could just sprinkle my magic pixie dust all across the United States, I would be planting seeds all over the country to grow this game. Whether it's lighted futsal courts, and you and I have talked about this. Those futsal courts that have the basketball nets on them, you see them all over Europe and England. I would put those everywhere. Put them everywhere. I take the BART, and for those that don't know what the BART is, it's the Barrier Rapid Transportation. It's what I take to work, and I go through some poor neighborhoods in Oakland, and I see empty lots. I'm like, that'd be a great place for a futsal court. I think there's so many opportunities to create safe places for kids to play that just get them to love the game, let them fall in love with it, and really enjoy the small sided aspect. You don't have to have these big 11v11 pitches. Do a futsal court, play 3-on-3, play 4-on-4. It's simple to do. All you need is a ball. It's part of the reason why I think basketball has been so successful in this country is that you can put a basketball court anywhere. Well, guess what? You can put a net underneath the basketball hoop. And I would really encourage people to start doing that. And so that would be what I would try and do. Get more kids to fall in love with this game.
Well, I think that is a great a great place to focus on. The more we can get kids playing the game, loving the game, falling in love with the game, and getting technically proficient at the game, and you get those natural, competitive matches between kids. You see it, 2-on-2, 3-on-3, 3-on-2. I mean, you watch them play, and I think that's part of that basketball culture that you were referring to. If we could get some of that going in American soccer, I think American soccer at large would be better for it if we could do that in scale, on a macro level across the country, for sure. It would help us.
The Brazilians do it. They play small-sided from the time they're little. They don't go out. They don't go and play on a full-size pitch for a while.
Yeah, and I think it's I had Tom Byer on the show on Monday, and he was talking about culture. And how culture eats strategy for breakfast, and so finding ways for us to improve our soccer culture is what you were hitting on, and I think it's a great place for us to wind up our conversation today. And it was a great answer from you. I really appreciate you coming on the show, spending some time with us, and sharing your thoughts about American soccer and how we can continue to grow and find ways to get better, and get more kids involved playing the game, etc. Good luck with your work out there in the West region, and serving on the board of directors of U.S. Youth Soccer. And we look forward to having you back on again in the future.
Daniel, thank you. This was really good, and hopefully, where this is pre-taped, hopefully I'm not going to jinx them, but I want to say congrats to our women's team.
We shall see on Wednesday morning. We shall see how this thing turns out between the U.S. and England. My prediction going into the match was the same as for France. If the U.S. scores early, I think that bodes well for them. If England score early, I think it could be trouble. And not to say that the U.S. couldn't come back. I just that's just my feeling on the game. So hopefully the U.S. get an early goal and are able to keep the pressure on from there. So we'll see how it shapes up.
Sounds good. My prediction is 3-1. We'll see how it, and that's 3-1 U.S. Our women are going to be victorious.
All right. Well, we'll see how that plays out, my man. Thank you for coming on the show. And like I said, we look forward to having you back on again in the future.
Definitely, Daniel. Take care. Have a good 4th.
Thank you. That was Tom Sowinski, and really appreciate him coming on the show. Our sponsor this half hour is Charity Water. You can learn more about Charity Water at charitywater.org. You can join the story, be a part of the movement at charitywater.org. We'll be right back after this.
No one, no man, no woman, no child should ever have to drink green water with bugs, with algae, with disease in it. Bad water and a lack of toilets kills more people than all the wars in the world. We know how to bring clean drinking water right now to every single person on earth. And when you can bring water into communities, it truly transforms them. It changes everything. Or you could know that you'd made a difference. You could know that you had truly impacted the life of a family, of a community, of a region. There was either clean water or there wasn't. We believe in a world where every single person has clean and safe water to drink, and we will continue fighting until that happens.
Welcome to the show. Thanks for tuning in today, July the 3rd. That was our interview we taped with Thomas Sowinski the other night. His prediction 3-1. He was close. 2-1. The U.S. pulled off the victory against England. It was a back and forth affair. Like we said earlier, could have gone either way, but ended up in our favor. So final on Sunday. The other semifinal today to see who plays the U.S. I think it's going to be the Netherlands that beats Sweden. And also last night, Argentina, Brazil, a contentious semifinal in Copa America. Messi, after the match, was furious with the referees, felt like Aguero had gotten fouled for a penalty. No review, no stoppage of play, no foul called. Brazil goes right down and scores the second goal instead of a possible game-tying penalty kick for 1-1, and Argentina is out of the semis of Copa America. Brazil is in the final, and so a lot of going on yesterday in the world of soccer, and we'll see what happens today. Thanks for tuning into the show. As always, you can watch live at danielworkman.com, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time weekdays. Thanks for following the show, watching the show, and congrats to the U.S. Women's National Team as they prepare for the final of the Women's World Cup coming up on Sunday. We'll see everybody again tomorrow. Goodbye.